Good morning, everyone. We are in the committee of the whole meeting of September 19th. Passing this call and peace classically Homish, Owayomil, which means welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There's an agenda in front of the committee. I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Peter, seconded by Ted. All those in favor? Opposed? Any motion carries. Councillor Race, unfortunately, isn't here. He had a medical thing. And Councillor Elliott can't get here until afternoon, so hopefully Councillor Buckman will join soon. And I'll pass it over to Chris or Dora.
All right. Good morning. My name is Dora Gunn, and I'm a sustainability coordinator with the Circus Squamish. This morning, I am going to provide an update on some current and upcoming changes to the Squamish transit system, and you can't see that. So let me just switch it on. There we go. So I'm just going to quickly review the changes that have just happened. On September 1st, we had a fare change. It's the first fare change since 2008. 12 and under age now rides free. Universal tickets for all other users are $2, and there are transfers still available for that are good for 90 minutes. And there's a day pass for $4. The monthly pass prices are unchanged, so $20 for seniors and students and $39 for adults. And the Handy Dark tickets are also unchanged at $1.75. We also had some schedule changes come into effect on September 5th. We had increased Sunday and holiday service. We had increased frequency on the core network, and it went from an average of bus coming every 23 minutes on the core network from previously it was every 27 minutes. And we also had some adjusted run times to improve on-time performance. So I was asked to provide some feedback that we received on these changes. So generally it was a positive reception. No major challenges have been reported. For the 12 and unders, there was some information that wasn't quite correct on the BC Transit website, which said that they had to be accompanied by an adult initially, and that has now been fixed. So I think there's general understanding of how this works. The kids get on board and they just need to tell their age to the driver, and then they get to get on for free. And the drivers are reporting no problems at all with this, so it's working quite smoothly, which is great.
Can you get through something, or is it?
It's just a quick question.
Okay.
How do we measure how many kids are getting on? Do they keep track?
We can't at the moment measure that.
We will have no outcome measurements of free transit for kids.
That's right, that is correct.
Yeah, but they are putting in a way of measuring in 2018, aren't they?
I'm not sure.
Measuring overall ridership,
Right,
but not
free.
I think the people counter should be able to count all the people.
differentiate
Yeah,
the difference. Yeah. Okay.
so it'll count, at least it will be able to count all the people.
And then we have ticket fares.
And then we have the fares, and we
Separate
can sort of suppose how many are there.
So most of the adjustments to the run times have worked quite well, with the exception of Brackendale route, which is still having a hard time staying on schedule. So we'll be looking at that again with the next schedule change, which is planned in 2018. I've also heard that some of the buses are quite full at school times, particularly the Valleycliff bus heading down to Squamish Elementary. So in some ways that's a good thing. It means kids are riding the bus to get to school, but also a challenge that we need to look at for 2018. There's an online error that is still there. It's in the BC Transit schedule, and it's for the Valleycliff route, suggesting that the bus that gets the kids to school at Squamish Elementary is actually shown at the wrong time. So there's some initial confusion over that. BC Transit is aware of the error, and they're going to fix it, but they haven't yet. The error is also on the posters that are around Valleycliff. So I did send a note to the Squamish Elementary School, asking them to pass on the information to the parents. I'm not sure if they've done that or not. And lastly, there's some issues with keeping the bus schedules in stock on the buses. That's been solved. And that's pretty much all we heard. So overall, it was quite a smooth process.
So a question, actually, someone in the office said that their daughter was trying to get to work in the Highlands, and the Valleycliff bus wasn't connecting with the downtown bus to get up there. Is it that they just read the schedule and it actually does connect? Would that be? So it's not just the schools that we need to communicate that the schedule is wrong.
Oh, you mean the schedule is wrong?
Well, I don't know. Maybe that they looked at the schedule and they said the schedule doesn't allow her to hit the downtown bus to get to the Highlands. Or maybe she was just giving it on the line so mom would drive her.
I mean, at the downtown exchange, it should be that you can come from any bus, and then you may have to wait some period of time to get on any other bus going.
But you shouldn't have to miss it and wait 45 minutes.
No, so I guess if the bus is running late, which that is possible, if it was running late, they might have missed it when they expected to catch it.
No, they didn't even take it because they didn't think the schedules now.
We'll have a look at that.
Okay.
That's interesting feedback.
Okay, and then I just
Yeah,
thought.
Peter.
I know it's a fairly recent addition in some cases. Do we have any feedback yet on the new bus shelters? I can't imagine it being bad feedback.
You know what, the only thing I've heard about the bus shelters, which is a negative thing, is that the positioning of the benches on some of them is such that people are facing away from the bus. So there's nothing we can do about that at this point, unfortunately. Possibly we could go back if we have funding in the future and move the benches ourselves. We signed a contract, and in the contract is the description of the shelter. And that's the way it is.
Are they all up?
No.
Can we make sure the new ones don't get, because it is really quite stupid.
The reason it is the way it is because if you put it the other way, there's not enough room for the wheelchairs to get in and turn around in the shelter. So that's the trade-off.
I think in a situation in a larger city where you have many different buses coming, you gotta make sure you spot the right bus and then get out and wait down the drive for everything. It's maybe a larger issue than here where there's a single bus coming on most routes. And the bus driver can see where there's somebody in the shelter. So hopefully it's a bit more manageable here, but it's not ideal. And we can follow up with the proponent on what can be done on a site-by-site basis, but in some cases we are stuck with them the way they are because of practicalities and such.
I want to push on this a little bit because I heard about the complaint and I thought, oh, at least we have great police bus shelters, but I looked at it and said, it really is quite not intuitive. I don't understand why a wheelchair, and maybe I just need to be educated, why a wheelchair can't turn around if the chairs are facing the back as opposed to this side. And because you've got a huge open sidewalk in front of you, like there's lots of space.
So my understanding is in some cases there's not a huge open space in front. And when they design the shelters, they design them for the space required for a wheelchair to go in and turn around. And they actually have a specific radius for that. So I've seen the design and that is only accommodated when the seat is where it is. Perhaps we could ask someone to try some of them out and see if we could do it a different way.
Oh, that was it. Maybe just appeal to them and say, maybe can we try one with the bench somewhere else and just see how it works.
Yeah.
And if they're not all in, then maybe there's a discussion about how.
So the design of the roof, we should, before we start building a whole bunch more, review that a bit too, because it goes like this. So when you're sitting there,
That's the ones we put in.
your knees are getting wet.
Oh.
Okay, so I've heard Martin, I pick him up all the time at the bus stop, and he bitches about that every time. So anyway, you know the ones. And so after that, driving by, I always look and you can kind of see, it just said, it should be like this.
Okay.
That's good feedback, but we will look at that for future.
Ironically,
Those are
I
all
think
the
we did
district-
comment on that when the design came to Squamish as council. And we thought, why, it's up like this, your plane's gonna go right in, so.
Okay, so I thought I'd also touch on some upcoming changes and activities. We have ridership counts currently underway. This is in preparation for the 2018 expansions. They started September 5th and they're going to go for a week or two. There was some conversation at the previous council meeting about moving this up into August as well as September. Unfortunately, BC Transit just wasn't able to make it happen quick enough, so we're stuck with September. We are also going to be doing, BC Transit will be doing some public consultation on the upcoming expansions. That's planned for late fall or early winter. And there will be a public open house. And the date I've been given for the real-time technology, which is app with the Vision Bus, it is July 2018 for implementation in Squamish. And the proposed expansions for 2018 are, you've seen this before, in April, the seasonal park service. We're still looking at South Parks rather than North Parks, only because the turnarounds are very difficult in the north. However, we are going to ask the question at the public consultation about public preference between the two. Also in April is expanded handy dart service, and that's a second handy dart, a third handy dart vehicle. And then in September, increasing the service on the core network and continuing to improve the service reliability.
I'm gonna let you keep going and then we'll just
Okay.
collect our
That's all I've got.
That's it, okay, Councillor Kim.
I know this is kind of a redundant question, but the real-time technology, they're gonna be putting that in all the buses in one shot, right?
That's right,
Okay.
yeah.
Supposed to be in a year and a half ago and now.
Exactly, I have, yeah, I'm glad everything's moving forward. I don't know how we can make decisions and how they don't have ridership counts. That makes no sense to me that we've gone pretty much 3 years without any ridership counts. And we've been continually making decisions in the dark as far as data is concerned and having appropriate tools to make decisions on where the best bus improvements should be. So I look forward to, as quick as possible, getting our ridership details. And it's, I actually prefer them counting in September when the school is back, so that'll be really interesting.
I kind of like the idea of having it in the summer too, so you can see the difference a little bit too, but you definitely need it in September. And I agree why we don't have counters. We're trying to make decisions based on data and real-time information, and we're done this.
Oh, I saw a rider.
And don't get me wrong about the bus stops. It's so fantastic that we have probably about 25-ish in the whole program, 27, something like that. She's counting her head. But that's significant, and they may not be perfect, but it's fantastic that we're getting others. So. Ted, did I hear that?
Yeah, I just, on the ridership count, and, you know, I'm just reflecting what Susan said, because it seems like every time we meet with those guys, that question comes up every time. And I wouldn't want to meet with them again without that ridership count. If they want to meet with us, they have to bring that. Otherwise, I'm going to go have a coffee.
I'm not sure I'm going to make that prerequisite for the
Well, I
agenda.
will.
but-
We won't see it, Patty.
Well, they say,
Well, they won't be.
it's in
You
the
say it every
2018.
time. Oh, yeah, we'll bring it next time.
That's true.
My understanding on the ridership is that at the moment, the only way they have to measure ridership is through fares. And so we can only get ridership on a route-by-route basis because we don't know when the fare is paid, except that it's on that route.
Yeah.
So that's the best we have until we have the new technology in 2018.
I actually prefer route by route information, because if we're expanding route or subtracting route, that's exactly the information we need. I think that when we look at our profile, we've got a really unusual community layout to be able to do proficient transit in. So having route by route numbers is really important, and also figuring out where our economy goes. There's so many decisions, so many variables that we need to make decisions on. Even densification and where we're putting houses is all really important information. So even for staff to know, decisions to improving transit, having all the decisions at the table, they may be able to provide route by route numbers, but we have all the densification, and we need to really keep track of how we are improving the neighborhood.
And that's why I think, we have route by route information now because we have fares and we know where they're picked up. But it's the fine grained stuff. We know where the busy stops are. We know maybe where there's stops that nobody shows up. Maybe there's alterations. Maybe we can put more bus shelters in certain strategic locations as well. So I think that information is so critical. So please, it's in 2018 budget. If we can somehow actually get it implemented early in the years, it's in our budget and BC Transit's budget. And is their year end March? Like when would they have the monies for the next year?
March, they're going through the process right now with this real-time technology. They've selected a vendor and they're working on design right now, so it's in process. It's just not planning to be implemented in Squamish until July of 2018.
No, that's the real time, but the
Oh,
counter,
sorry.
the counters,
The counters.
is that in the
That's all
budget?
part of it together, as far as I understand it. Is that your understanding?
I'm
Mr.
not
Chair?
sure if it's phased or not. The last time they were here, they reported on that, they indicated that the hardware is part of the new buses, so we already have the hardware, and it's now the software in the back end and all that sort of thing that they're working on, and that may actually be on an earlier schedule to be the people counters, as opposed to the real-time drive.
If we can move up the schedule, let's see what we can do, and maybe we do some urging from our level.
So if we do route by route, is it up to staff to get those stats onto a page? I mean, have we ever seen route by route stats? Sue, have you seen them?
So
Dora, have you seen that?
I have not seen them exactly like that, no, so I can request that.
Request that.
You know, so I'm, I mean, without, rather than waiting years for the new counters, route by route would be better than nothing.
Okay, we're over time.
One quick thing, how are we communicating handy dart expansion?
There will be a communications plan put together before it's announced. No, we haven't done that yet.
Awesome.
Thanks for that.
Anything else? Thank you very much. Slowly but surely. Next up, we have a discussion about missing middle housing. And do invite anyone who's in the audience, if they do want to ask a question, make a comment, please just put your hand up and happy to entertain anybody's. Is Jonas coming in there? Or is Sarah?
Jones is,
Yeah.
Mayor and Council, our understanding of the sort of the middle, sorry, that's the title within the missing middle, obviously, missing part, is that council's concerned that we're getting sort of a limited range of housing in the community and zonings, and that council wanted to see rezoning proposals, development proposals, bring a greater or more diverse range of housing forms across the entire spectrum, rather than just being singles, duplexes and apartments and some row townhouses. That was a greater diversity we wanted to see. So, where we've gone with that first is to put some policy in the new draft OCP that would indicate that that's desired and required as part of any rezoning application. So that's a very high strategic level ask or requirement that it's a greater level of variety. Where the next level of policy that we're going to see is the sub-area plan or the neighbourhood plan. You see the next level of detail about what greater diversity means. We've talked about sub-area plans requiring sort of density targets or density guidelines, so you're expected to meet those. So you can see increasing levels of density about increasing levels of definition about what that diversity means, and then finally you see the particular detail contained like in the zoning bylaw. So that's the sort of regulatory approach we were intending to take.
So one thing we talked about was actually putting some slides up there about the missing middle, some graphics, because people I don't think really understand what we mean, because it's not just about more than just townhomes or single-family homes or condos. It's about not having homogeneous neighborhoods, having integration of all these housing forms, having more density that fits in with the vernacular or the massing of single-family neighborhoods or that type of massing. So it's more than just we want to see different housing. And I think I wanted council to have a bit of a discussion about what it is, because it's certainly a buzzword right now. You're hearing it all over the place. There's some good graphics to sort of that articulate, and I showed them to either Gary or Jonas to have at this meeting. So can we pull something up on the computer? Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's really interesting that we're talking about the missing middle, where complete communities and a lot of communities around pretty much everywhere already have that sort of dynamic of housing where you have triplexes and a variety of housing as opposed to what we're getting now. And it's really interesting that we have to re-legislate density like that into our neighborhoods as opposed to, you know, it just seems sort of backwards that people wouldn't want to have that missing middle because it actually adds profit to housing, but, you know, like triplexes and medium-sized apartment buildings instead of having it all be townhouses makes a lot more sense, and you see it in so many different neighborhoods all over Canada, but we're having to re-legislate it back into our community, which I find backwards.
Well, I think, and I don't necessarily blame the people who are building. It's the homogeneous zoning stuff that came in the 50s that really created those single-use, single housing form neighborhoods. And any neighborhoods that were pre-World War II, even really pre-World War I, you get that integration 100%. A subsidized house beside a $3 million home. Like, we don't have these sort of, there's certainly elite neighborhoods and that type of thing, but a lot of these neighborhoods are very integrated. I've got a couple hands, I just want to, this is sort of the graphic that you see. And we certainly get townhomes, but we aren't seeing any single-story bungalow type things. We're not seeing real multiplex. Get a little bit of live work, courtyard apartments, but sort of small form apartments, a 3-story apartment with 8 to 12 units kind of thing. I suspect there's an argument that the building industry says it's too expensive to do that type of thing, or whatever. Maybe, maybe not. But we're thinking about how do we make these neighborhoods sustainable and livable and integrated and have your mom and your kids and everybody be able to live in one neighborhood, no matter what their economic income is. We're not ghettoizing others, ghettoizing one way or the other. I've got Ted and then Susan, and I'll go to Sarah maybe if you want to articulate a bit more on that.
Yeah, thank you. If you look at the development that's coming now, we are actually getting middle mixed. I mean, if you look at the bigger lots across from the high school right now, they're going into townhomes. That was all single family. And in our zoning, if you've got a lot bigger than 7,500 square feet, you can put in a fourplex. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you're in, they're popping up. So we are doing this somewhat. And so...
With the infill development, yeah.
Yeah, with all the infill development. So when you look at this one here, that's 4 city blocks we're looking at. And so when I look at this type of policy that we're trying to write, it's not for the little lots around town, although we could spice that up a little bit to add more. You could say in a single family neighborhood, oh, anybody wants to tear their single family home down and put in a 3-plex, go for it. And then you'd get lots of 3-plexes in single family neighborhoods. But being this is on, this is, policy is just for bigger developments, is what I'm trying to say.
So I'll go to Sarah quickly.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to add to the discussion, in the fierce editing that we're doing to the OCP right now, I've been tackling the housing section. The missing middle policies that we're developing are fitting into a sort of a chapter or a subheader around healthy housing, mix and diversity. And so the approach that we're taking in policy, recognizing that missing middle is really trying to fill a gap between detached single unit and then higher densities or mid-rise and higher density apartments. So the tactics that we're taking are to really promote a greater diversity and variety of housing, scaled to fit within all neighborhoods, basically, and highlighting that we're looking for a more diverse, inclusive, and sustainable long-term housing mix within each development and each neighborhood. And so we start to call out in the policy the types of the greater diversity of housing, so reflecting some of the forms that are highlighted here. Cottages, courtyard housing, row housing, duplexes, triplexes, stacked flats, those kinds of things to really sort of highlight the diversity, while of course continuing to support small lot infill and secondary suites. So really the focus is trying to expand the local housing mix, but as Gary noted, in terms of how we achieve that, so that we can set the policy context, but in terms of how that plays out through the sub-area planning and neighborhood planning, that comes into play, but then ultimately through the zoning, that's where we really need to make a shift, because conventional zoning is not going to help us out. We've got, you know, detached single-unit zones that only allow right now single and two-unit dwellings. And so for a lot of these densifying neighborhoods that have predominantly RS1 and RS2, that's not going to help us. So the shift really is that we're moving towards trying to find a way to basically achieve blended forms and densities within our zones. And so a lot of communities end up moving away from kind of conventional density-based or density-centric zones into something that's more form-based, so that we can start to make that shift and fill that gap. So it's not just large development projects where we're looking to do this. It's actually in our existing neighborhoods and in those detached zones. So that's the sort of the big shift that will happen once we set the policy context in our CP, and then move to explore and sort out on the zoning side. So hopefully that sort of helps to highlight what we're aiming to do.
Thanks, that's fantastic, and that's exactly sort of what I was going to speak to, is it's different when you're building forms like this. This was density from the 50s and 60s, where it was desirable to have apartments and build this sort of format, and a lot of these neighborhoods are brick, not wood, and in our building scheme in Squamish, our housing was all built as single-family RS1. So it's different when you're going from RS1. I think it's a much more complicated formula, and I really like what staff's put forward, is having being able to densify smaller lots in different ways. I think will encourage different infill development, but I think about the lots downtown that are 6,000 square feet, where you could have, most of them in the downtown were already zoned for duplex. And so we have duplex zoning that was, then you're allowed to add a laneway house, but that knocks out your duplex zoning because you've already put two houses on the lot, where you could still have a duplex or a triplex or whatever, you could even go up in the front. And just imagining, but we're already legislating out density on those lots, so it's going to encourage wiping out 5 single-family homes and just putting in townhouses. So we're not going to get any mixed density, we're just going to get the same sort of form because of only allowing 2 homes or 3 homes per lot. So I just wonder if there's a way that you can encourage more of a mixed use in the areas that you want to be really dense, and then sort of stretch it out over the 12 kilometers that we have to build in. It's an interesting conundrum when you're going from that, because it's, you have single-family neighborhoods that are adamantly single-family neighborhoods, and then we'll want that mixed density in there, but we only have so much infrastructure and we only have so much land. So I think this moving towards a policy where we look at FSR is a good way to go. I like Gary's and Sarah's recommendation.
Before Sarah, I'll just add, one of the sort of things that started to get us talking about this was a single-family subdivision in Brackendale, where it was just 100% single-family homes. And the neighborhood got, more density gets thrown out there, and the neighborhood gets a little bit excited about density. And I think where there's a communication issue and a perception issue is what is gentle density, and that it's going to change the vernacular of the neighborhood. And the idea of mixed middle is that you're not really changing the vernacular, you're just diversifying the housing. You're gently densifying, you're not putting in a ton of people within an area. And so I think there's a communication piece there too. But it's not necessarily just about densifying, it's about diversifying.
Absolutely, and I think too, it's the conversation is about integration of greater diversity of uses. Put aside the density conversation for a moment. It's just around how can we integrate as opposed to segregating and separating different forms of housing. One of the policy directions that we tested out in the OCP process with the discussion draft and with the policy discussion guides was a policy that aims to basically move away from and try and discourage exclusively single detached unit subdivisions in favor of a more integrated approach. And so that was one that we tested out, and it's definitely still in the discussion draft, and certainly might be a hot topic for some, but certainly that we're trying to, in the same way that we're talking about neighborhood nodes and complete neighborhoods, it's really about that integration and consolidation.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Littleton.
Here's where I have the opposite thought of densifying within Chikai fan reflow and environmental hazards. How do you reconcile implementing density in areas that are prone to flooding and hazard? And if you start densifying, what does that look like for building code? What does that look like for, I was not interested in densifying until we sorted out the Chikai fan in that particular area. So I'd be more, I even think about, what would happen if we moved our community up? And moved our residential, started densifying higher up. We've got all single-family homes higher up, and then we're densifying in a floodplain. So I'd be interested to hear comments from engineering and comments from other areas in our municipality on how you reconcile the hazards of living.
We're getting a little off topic.
Yeah, but that's not,
It's
I
a
think
more
that's
conversation,
important
but
not
it's
to
not
lose that.
necessarily about the diversity piece, it's about the where-to piece.
Exactly.
So, that's,
Yeah,
and
fair enough.
we're trying to do that through the OCP, through the integrated flood hazard
Yeah,
management.
I think it's something to keep top of mind though
Yeah.
as well. It's that counter conversation that I always have with myself, talking about density within infrastructure and then thinking, God, we built our
And
own
building more
infrastructure
infrastructure and costing
disaster.
more, there's pros and cons to both, but that's another conversation.
Yeah.
Quickly goes to Ted, and if anyone wants to contribute or ask a question, please just put your hand up and come up and join us.
So I think I heard Sarah say that along with this, moving this forward, it goes into neighborhood plans first. So you go through a neighborhood planning consultation with the neighborhood to find out what they want. And then,
Or sub-area plans for new developments, whether they're
yeah,
greenfield
for
or
new
brownfield
developments,
or whatever.
but how do you integrate into a neighborhood is going through a neighborhood plan process so that the neighborhood has a chance to.
And I think also, outside of neighborhood plans and sub-area plans for larger projects, this policy will come to play for council in discretionary rezoning conversations and, site-specific project review as well. So, staff will be bringing forward the whole suite of policies that apply around housing mix and diversity for council to consider, and through development review, we can assess how well a project is meeting that diversity mix, integrating it within our.
So just to follow up on that then, so that allows, that's good because that allows someone with a good idea in a neighborhood that thinks they have something that may fit and diversify the neighborhood to come forward prior to all this stuff, prior to a neighborhood. Right?
Certainly through the mayor, when proponents are preparing projects, they are hopefully looking at our official community plan in terms of what the community is aiming for. And so that policy sitting there will provide a clear signal to the development community that we are looking for greater mix and diversity of housing. So hopefully there's a response there if they're looking for favorable consideration, but certainly that alignment, this helps to drive that alignment.
So I think Sarah just finished saying what I was just about to say in your last comment there, is that once we get that, the discretionary zoning and the policy set in the OCP is to let the development community know that we're open to other forms and saying, this is where we'd like to see
We're
it.
not open, we are looking.
Yeah, well, open looking.
You must.
It's semantics, but getting the message out there that, we welcome.
Thanks. And I'm looking at the missing middle here, and I'm having trouble imagining all those housing structures 5 meters off the ground. So I have trouble separating the conversation of affordability and density from flood construction levels and where we want its density. I mean, you can look at these pictures, but you plop them into a flood area construction level, and you have no ground floor bungalow cores, courtyard apartments, multiplexes, all have to be on a giant cement
Everything,
structure.
all of it.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, that may be why we get townhouses, and, you know, I just wonder, I think it just all has to be thought about together. It's, we separate it into planning, it all sounds like a good idea. When we throw engineering in there, you know, all of a sudden it's like, you know, to actually build structures like that is incredibly expensive, plus seniors housing, you know, having everything to have to go upstairs. You know, I wonder what it looks like for a seniors population when every single unit has to have a staircase up 5 meters, so
Elevator.
that, yeah, or, yeah, an
Yeah.
elevator in every house.
And those are all things we have to work through.
Yeah.
This is a conversation of how do we get mixed instead of just the 3 forms that we see at the beginning.
Yes, so, that's an issue in downtown Denville and North Yards to a degree, but the further out you go, that's not going to be the case in some of these forms in the estates or highlands are eminently buildable at marginally above grade,
Yes.
which is probably where the vast majority of our redevelopment is going to be in the future. So I don't deny that.
And I agree
But
with you completely.
it's a problem in part of the community.
And we are getting off topic.
We are.
I just want to see if there's anyone who wants to, yeah, come on up now. Come on, Phil. Just have that, be good. Anyways.
Just all my background in housing and
Absolutely.
whatnot, and the one thing, and this was within the comments that I sent to Sarah and Matt, was just what is the current mix right now and what's not working with it, and even to understand where you are right now. I would assume that you guys are heavy on the single family, but I also think that there is some smaller single family duplexes out there that are meeting that missing middle. I think of, Ample Path obviously is one. Also, what's the current need is, what are people looking for? Obviously from a development point perspective, if nobody wants to live in multifamily, where is that? And maybe that's just a decision like Vancouver is now, that you just don't. If you live in Squamish, you will not be living in a single family, but just working with those needs. And I know that being on council during pre-Olympics is that the community finally realized they had to live in a duplex. And it took that need argument before they were willing to accept it, till they saw the actual crisis. And maybe we're there already. And then one thing that I listen frequently to CPC, probably we all do with our 2 radio channels, but UDI is very engaged with the City of Vancouver and other municipalities. And I think maybe 8 or 9 years ago, you didn't have that many diverse development companies, but rather than me standing here, it might be better to actually engage with UDI through staff to see if there is an interest with UDI having a group of Squamish developers that sort of have one common voice rather than you have a whole bunch of them. And also UDI has incredible resources like the Planning Institute that can give you, rather than just one developer.
Yeah.
And as well, the City of Vancouver just came out with another whole bunch of small initiatives that help with the missing middle too, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. So that's really all I have. It's interesting.
And we
Free
certainly don't
consultation.
want to not have, like, single family, people are going to build single family homes, there's lots out there that we build. We're going to get mid-rise and higher density condominium type things. That's no problem. Even the town home, people love to go and buy a big lot, but it's the homogeneousness.
Yeah,
That word? Homogeneous.
and to staff's credit is every project we bring to them, they say they want mixed density. So I think it will
Yeah.
really help them.
But really mixed, really
Yeah.
integrated mix, not like this whole
This
part
here.
is single family and this whole part is townhome. Like, have a row house beside a single family, beside a duplex, beside it, integrated.
And it's funny because Brackendale actually has a lot of that.
It's getting it.
Yeah, like a lot of people, I always thought, oh, it's so single family, but when you drive down, you're like, oh, there's multifamily, and then there's a duplex, and then there's a single family. So it's sort of just happened. I don't know if it was planned, but I think it just happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Anyone else want to add more? So So this is coming, we're gonna see this in the OCP, and then we'll start to see it in some of the policy that is directing our sub-area plans and infill development. Great. Thank you, much appreciated. Looks like we have a recess. We have a recess, we have a lunch right now. Good job.
Wow.
We're on time.
Can you imagine? We should talk.
It's only 4 of us.
That's right, that's what I want.
All right, we'll be back here at 12:30, and we have our community money contribution conversation then, and then our photo housing is at 2. We're back in our community hall meeting of September 19th, and we're on item 3.3, community money contribution policy. Gary?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Gary Buxton, the General Manager here at the District. So today we wanted to give Council a first look at what is a more rigorous community amenity contribution policy. Previously we worked with targets and guidelines, so this is Council's first look at something a little bit more formalised. So CACs or community amenity contributions are not sort of legislated under the Act or the Charter. There are non-statutory negotiated means for new development to contribute to some of the burdens associated with new development outside of the more legislated charges we know as development cost charges and other similar fees and charges. The only guidance we get is sort of that document that I've cited from the government. So we currently have a set of targets and allocations. It's short of a formal policy document from December of 2015. Those were developed largely in working with a consultant as part of the SODC negotiations through the latter part of 2015 and further refined before they were adopted. Now the consultant considered a fairly exhaustive list of potential amenities, but it was a little lighter on funding sources and prioritisation. So we think that funding options and prioritisations are addressed a little bit better by this policy to address those issues that weren't adequately addressed previously. Also, we're all aware of the recent changes since 2015 in the housing market, the decrease in housing affordability we've experienced. And so we've tried to address some of the recommendations of the Housing Task Force that ran through the latter part of 2015 and 2016 as well through this policy. So Council did review this matter back in April. It was a sort of discussion point. Significant discussions or decisions or directions we got at that point was that there was sort of general agreement around daycare contributions through the CAC targets, around a percentage of purpose-built affordable housing as part of any subsequent policy, a wider definition of critical amenities, and suggested agreement around a split between affordable housing and critical amenities with respect to cash and new contributions. Based on that, we've revised the targets and allocations table. That's essentially the new section 2. Section 1 of the policy is where the meat and potatoes of the targets and allocations previously was landed in the new policy. So at a broad brush, the new CAC policy has that smaller rezonings, less than 20 dwelling units, will pay cash in low amounts. And those remain unchanged. We haven't adjusted those amounts from the current targets and allocation tables. Rather than attempt to require that they provide physical provision of those units, whereas the larger rezonings are being sort of asked to consider construction and provision of affordable housing units as part of their CAC contributions. So that's consistent with a number of other municipalities and the recommendations of the Housing Task Force. And the basic rationale is we have limited resources, financially, land and expertise, and those are all resident in the development community. So the broad intent is to leverage affordable housing through the rezoning process from new development. That's the upside. The downside is if we become less busy and we see less of those applications, we don't get any units. 10% of the development we see now is potentially robust, 10% of zero is still zero. So, there is a bit of a risk with this strategy. So in an attempt to sort of quickly give council a summary of the policy, starting out with the definitions. The definition of affordable housing is deliberately open so that we can allow that to be developed likely more appropriately in an affordable housing policy, which will be developed. We'll discuss that later on this afternoon. There is an improved definition of critical amenities that's been included, and it expands the range of options for spending cash and loan. And so, going through the more significant sections, section 1 is the table of target contributions. As noted, residential applications of less than 20 dwelling units provide cash in lieu, the elements remain unchanged. And active transportation and parking amenities that are intended to address issues related specifically to that development. So they'll be tailored to each individual development and zoning application. Larger residential applications, that's the one over, provide 10% of the proposed housing units as affordable, as well as addressing again the active transportation and park issues. So the sort of dual purpose is address the larger affordable housing issues and then address some of the issues around parks and active transportation that inevitably follow any increase in density in the residential area. As an aside, employee staff housing could be provided as an amenity. That allowance has been made possible. And mixed-use applications start to incur amenity contributions once you exceed the existing FAR floor area ratio. Previously, it was once you exceeded 1.0, but here it basically sets the bar wherever it is right now, and then contributions start from that point. Section 3 outlines that the table is really intended to cover sort of the typical zoning applications, the more significant OTP redesignation or amendment applications are expected to treat those, the target contributions in section 1 as the best. That's where you start and then you need to go from there. Section 4 also outlines that there are direct impacts connected to an application, and then they need to be addressed too. So if hypothetically an application for rezoning required us to purchase some new firefighting equipment, so hypothetically then we expect that the contribution will contribute proportionally to that impact. Section 5 discourages flow-through contributions to other organisations. We have seen them and they are problematic from a financial point of view and a tracking point of view. Section 7 identifies that the housing units that are required in Table 1 have to be protected under a housing agreement. Those are specifically outlined under the Act. Section 10 clearly identifies that if there are required frontage improvements under the subdivision development control bylaw, then those are not amenity contributions. 11 identifies that market rent housing isn't an amenity contribution unless expressly approved by council. So we do leave council some flexibility there, depending on the particular situation you may be dealing with. Section 12 outlines that non-market housing applications. So the best example of this would be the under one roof, the rezoning application. If it's already a non-market housing application, then we wouldn't expect an amenity contribution from that application. Section 13 deals with how the reserve fund for the cash amounts would be handled, and subsection C outlines that the amounts are to be used only to fund critical amenity projects, which I say can be fairly widely defined by council. Subsequent sections deal with a 3-year review and consultation with the industry, which is sort of, I think, where we're at if council is confident in proceeding with what they see in front of them. So That's really sort of a very quick overview of the policy. So at this point, I'm open to questions, comments.
Thanks. I have a question. One of the things we talked about, and I can't remember which meeting or where the context, was differentiating between a community amenity for an infill development and a community amenity for greenfield. There'd be a higher expectation of community amenity through a greenfield development than an infill development, and we don't differentiate that now. It's all done with the same brush.
Okay, so crudely then I've tried to address that in section 3, which deals with the major new development projects, including OCP amendments and multiple parcel rezonings. If we want to be specific about greenfield events, we could certainly do that. We'd need to then define greenfields. I guess I've had a go at it, but if I haven't hit the mark, then...
Well, just not sure how that statement will actually influence the difference. Exceed minimum, I guess it's the same as the same. I don't think it hits the mark, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
And then just a quick question, and I'll go to Ted. And I can't remember the rationale 100% on why $10,000 for a single-family home and $6 per square foot, and why we landed on $6 a square foot. So if you build a townhouse and that's 1,666 feet, you're paying $10,000 for that townhome. And I'm just wondering how we came to the $6 number and versus the $10,000. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like a single-family home can be 4,000 square feet at the end of a pipe, and it's paying 10,000 per square foot. It's actually way less than $6 a square foot. Whereas a townhome, $6 a square foot, it's only just over 1,500, 1,600 square foot townhome. You're having to pay the same community amenity as a single-family home.
Yes, and to be honest, I didn't get into I didn't review the numbers or where those came from. I simply left them intact. I suspect if you've done the math at 1,600 square feet gets you the same amount, is that's meant to be an equaliser. And that 1,600 is fairly typical for a townhouse, so you're going to get the same amount. I could certainly, Miss McJanet may have a better answer to where those numbers came from. I simply did not.
And I know it gets more complicated once you know, it does. Maybe it should be square footage for a single family home, because if you build a 4,000 square foot home or a 2,000 square foot home, it should be different. I don't know. I know it gets really much more complicated in terms of math, but I'm just putting it out there for council to think about for staff. I know it's easy to say 10 and 6, but it's really helping to accomplish some of the other goals we're trying to achieve as well. And fairness.